productions, we are able to build up reliable, sustainable, and green industry that are within our countries and create a lot of jobs. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for the presentation. Without a waste of time, we'll move on to the next speaker, Dr. Bernard from ISO TC 229 Working Group 1. She will do her presentation on nanotechnology and advanced materials vocabulary. Over to you, Dr. Bernard.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, yes, up there. But okay, now I only see, okay.
Okay.
It is back.
Yeah. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. So I'm gonna be talking about the work of ISO TC 229 Nanotechnology, Joint Working Group 1 Terminology and Nomenclature. So I'm the convener of JWG1 ISO TC 229, and I'm also an expert on Working Group 3, which is on environmental health and safety. Normally, I'm an associate professor at University of Alberta in the Division of Preventive Medicine, and I'm an occupational hygienist. Okay, so I'm going to give an introduction of the group, the different types of ISO standards, published standards, current projects, future projects, some examples of definitions and challenges. So JWG1 is a joint working group between ISO TC 229 and IEC TC 113. So IEC is the International Electrical Committee. It's nanotechnology for electrotechnical product and systems, and terminology and nomenclature. So it started in 2006, and the convener at the time was Clive Willis, with Aredos Sarma as a co-convener from IEC, and Brian Eden from the Canadian Standard Association was the secretary. I'm the convener since 2016 when Clive Willis retired. And now Gregory Lopinski is the co-convener since 2019. And presently we don't have any secretary. We develop our own standards, and we also help other working groups with their own definitions. So the different types of ISO standards, you can have an international standard that are reviewed every 5 years, a technical specification that are reviewed every 3 years.
We can hear you, Bernard. Bernard.
Sorry, Fallen, I think she lost connection.
Yes, she can't even hear me. Let's just give her maybe 1 minute or two.
She sent a chat. She says her computer just jammed. So maybe let's move on to the next presenter while she sorts that out.
All right. Thanks for that, Faith. We will move on to the next presenter, Ms. Mar from OECD. Okay. She will do a presentation on the overview of activities at OECD on nanotechnology. Over to you, Ms. Ma, while we're waiting for.
Thank you so much, and I will keep it on the time so Bernadette can just join us.
Thank you.
So let me see if you can see it correctly. So.
Sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting. I don't know what happened.
Should I leave Bernadette to continue?
Hi, Bernadette.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got kicked out of the meeting. I'm not sure why.
Yes, we just saw your message on the chat box. Do you want to continue? Because I've already allowed Ms. Mar to start with her presentation, but she hasn't started.
Yeah, I haven't started.
Well, I can
Bernadette.
continue. Hopefully, if I have the problem again, okay.
Sure.
That's fine, Bernard. You can continue. Sorry, Mars, you will do your presentation after Bernard.
Okay, so okay. All right. So okay, so I was here. Did you see the previous one where I talked about the different standards?
Yes, I think you were done with this one.
Okay, so these are the 80,004 series. These are standards that are developed jointly with IEC TC 113. So we have actually 12 standards, core terms, nano objects, carbon nano objects, nanostructural materials, nano biointerface, nano object characterization, diagnostics and therapeutics for healthcare, nano manufacturing processes. One that was developed by IEC, actually the nano-enabled electrotechnical products and systems, nano layer, nano coatings, nano films, quantum phenomena, graphene, and other 2D material. These are all technical specification, and they're all on vocabulary only. We have other standards that are not developed conjointly with IEC, the one for cellulose nanomaterials, and we have vocabularies for science, technology, and innovation indicators. And then we have few technical reports. Most of them were published a long time ago before I became a convener. And with the current projects, right now we have what we call systematic reviews every 3 years, one on the graphene and other 2D materials, and the other one on the cellulose nanomaterials. We have a new project, so this one is an international standard. We actually regroup the parts 1, 2, 4, and 11 into part 1 core vocabulary, so it's a much larger standard. And then we have a TS on liposomes and another TS on general nomenclature. As future projects, we have revisions. So part 9 on nano-enabled electrotechnical products and systems, part 12 on quantum phenomena, but we don't, the document needs revision, but we need a project leader and a leading NSB. For part 9, Canada is going to review the project, IEC is going to review the project. Part 5 and 7 that are on nanomedicine and biotechnology, they need revision, but we haven't found any project leader or leading NSB. Now we have a new document, which is innovation in material and technology. And we want to look at other domains, so occupational health and safety, so vocabulary again, plastics, for example, nanoplastics, biotechnology, and food technology. So I put some definitions for core vocabulary. Here is for core vocabulary, so nanoscale, what we mean for nanoscale, what we mean for nanotechnology, and what we mean for nanomaterial, which may be different from other government bodies. Okay, these are other core definitions for core vocabulary. And these are, we have very strict rules for drafting ISO standards and definitions, and they normally should be short definitions. So we can add notes. You see on the nanostructure here, you have a note 1 to entry. And you can have actually definitions here where you have many notes or more than one note. So this is for graphene. I put some definitions for graphene. advanced materials, so graphene is a work in progress, although these definitions, I think, are not going to be changed because the document is in revision, but it's still in progress. This one is a brand new project, and so this is a work in progress. So this is the definition for advanced material. It not specific to nanotechnology, but because nobody else was actually defining the term, it seems that other TC were pretty happy with TC229 developing the term. It's been very difficult to develop a definition for advanced materials. And you can see that this one has like 8 different notes to entry. So the challenge is to develop terminology standards is really to find experts and project leaders or NSB, so national standard bodies, to develop the documents. The other challenge is to find consensus on terms and definitions. And for now, I think like almost 4 or 5 years, we've had some differences depending on the experts on the definition for the term graphene materials. A lot of experts from JWG1 are very careful about defining a term like that because it can be very vague. But some other experts really want that type of term to be defined, in particular experts from IEC. The difficulty is also to develop good quality definitions and to avoid circular or unhelpful definitions, confusing definitions, because this is an international standard, so it has to be understood the same way by everybody. And then we have issues associated with translation. So on the new document on general nomenclature, for example, the documents are in both French and English, but the order of terms in French and English can be different. If we go to other translation like Chinese or Russian, then you end up with even more problems. And I think that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Bernadette, for your presentation. We will move on to the next item on the program, which is the presentation by Ms. Mar from the OECD, the overview of activities at OECD on nanotechnology. I hope that you are ready, Ms. Mar.
Yes, can you see the slide or not?
Yes, I can see the slide.
Okay, excellent. So now
one.
We just have to make them work. So thank you so much for the invitation and to provide an overview of some of the activities that we're doing at the OECD on nanomaterials and advanced materials. So I'm Mar Gonzalez. I work at the Environment, Health and Safety Division, and I lead the Nanosafety program, which is part of a more comprehensive program on chemicals in general. Okay, so I hope today you get a better idea of what we're doing within OECD and areas that you might be interested in knowing a little bit more. So now the slide is not changing. Let me see if like this, yeah.
Put your camera on, Emma.
Okay, so can you see me there?
Not yet,
okay.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, excellent. I cannot see myself, thankfully, because, I'm always shy with cameras, but thank you so much. So the OECD is an intergovernmental organization, so it has 38 member countries. But we also have many partner countries, such as South Africa, for example, participating in the nano work, and other stakeholders representing industry, environmental NGOs, animal welfare organization, international organizations of a UNITAR, and we are also very grateful because we also have experts from ISO TC229 participating in our work, because I think both programs were established more or less at the same time. So that has facilitated a lot of collaboration throughout the years. So in general, the OECD has several objectives. One is really to assist OECD member countries' efforts to protect human health and the environment by improving chemical safety. We want to really help countries by developing and making policies more transparent and efficient and save resources by sharing the development of documents, but also to prevent unnecessary distortions in the trade of chemicals and facilitate this dialogue, for example, for trade between different companies, different countries. Something to mention is that all the decisions taken within the OECD program are made on a consensus basis by governments, okay? And then let me see why, okay, yeah. So the program on nanosafety and now more recently expanded to advanced materials is really, as I said, is really to develop standard methods to respond to regulatory needs. So the regulatory needs is really a major trigger, if you want, for our work. Some of the example of our outputs that we have are test guidelines for the safety assessment of nanomaterials. These documents take a lot of time to develop because we have to standardize the methods and we have to make sure that we have validation done for this. But we also can develop sometimes guidance documents. So either for existing test guidelines that were not developed originally for nanomaterials, but where you can just give some additional explanation to the study director on how to use the test guidelines for specific cases, or just to accompany some test guidelines that are being developed for nanomaterials. And in the program, we also developed some other guidance for hazard and exposure assessment of nanomaterials and other documents that can advance the knowledge in this area. And last but not least, we try also to anticipate some emerging issues of topics for regulatory preparedness that are popping up, if you want, in different countries across the OECD. So this is the way. This is the reason why the Nanosafety program was created, and this is the reason why now the Nanosafety program is starting to look on advanced materials. So this is just to explain that there are the very different areas covered within the working party on manufactured nanomaterials, on risk assessment, hazard assessment, and exposure assessment. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of the type of documents that we do, we recently published inventories of tools and models for assessing occupational exposure, consumer, and the environment. And this is going to trigger a project proposal right now on preparing some guidance on how to use these tools and models. We also published, for example, a document on what are the issues that you need to consider when trying to do some risk assessment of nanomaterials, or some more technical documents such as the ability of biopersistent and biodurable manufactured nanomaterials to induce LNP as a prediction tool, which was actually led by Professor Mari Gulumian from South Africa. So this is something to mention. And we are developing, for example, a major document that we're trying to update right now is a guidance on sample preparation and dosimetry. So you can see that there are different type of documents that are being developed within the OECD, but all at the end needs to be approved by consensus. This slide, I'm not going to go into detail, but it's just to show you the type of test guidelines and guidance documents that are really that we are currently developing, and those that have already been published. The most recent ones, 2 test guidelines on physical properties, one on surface area of manufactured materials and the other one on particle size and size distribution. All the documents are made publicly available, and they're also made available as draft when we have the revision process. So you can go online and you can access this draft and provide comments, even if you don't belong to an OECD delegation. I do want to mention that we have, again, that we have a very strong collaboration with ISO TC229, and you can see this reflected in the documents and a lot of standards that are being referred to in the documents that as we are developing them. So advanced materials, regulatory preparedness. Why are we doing this? I think some years ago, as I said, we were looking at different activities within member countries, and the issue about smart nano, advanced materials, third generation of nanomaterial was popping up more and more within in the reports from different member countries. So we start looking at this and the same logic that we have with nanomaterials at the beginning. To which extent the existing methods that we have for risk assessment of chemicals can be applicable to these new materials, and how to cope with the increasing speed of innovation and the number of products brought to market. I mean, what we don't want to do is to have like an over-regulation and to avoid and to impede innovation. I mean, I think we have heard in presentations before about the many benefits that we have with nanotechnologies, with nanomaterials, and the coverage of applicability that it has. So one thing that we question ourselves is whether we should also use this opportunity in looking at advanced materials to try to develop some different kind of approach. So for example, to look more of safe and sustainable by design, which was not originally, which is not necessarily the approach that we have for the risk assessment of chemicals. And how to use the knowledge acquired on nanomaterials, and how to incorporate new approaches that start developing in countries, for example, the EU Green Deal. So this is more or less about what triggered the discussion here, and understanding the advanced materials, the concept as such. For us, we understand this, that is like a moving target, and what it's advanced now is not going to be advanced later on as knowledge is gained. Okay, so we try to keep it pragmatic in the approach, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to move forward from an OECD point of view. So we start partnering with some members, in this case with Germany, who develop, who organized 3 thematic conferences on advanced materials to look more about what were the regulatory issues with advanced materials, what was an advanced materials, what could be considered or what shouldn't be considered if we want to move forward in implementing some pragmatic approach. And once those thematic conferences were finalized, which you can see, which was very recent. It was just like this year we had the last one. We had we agreed within the OECD community that we do have to have regulatory preparedness to cope with the pace of innovation, and that the nanomaterials will be like a good starting point for addressing advanced material. And this is just because the experts that were already in the community on nanomaterials are those that are already looking into these more complex materials, if you want. So to stay in our comfort zone, we agreed to start to focus on advanced materials with a nano component, and to start defining like the playing field, or the scope of the framework of the work that will be relevant for the working party on manufactured nanomaterials, and the work where the OECD can have some added value for all the work that is being done internationally. And then to develop a strategy to address advanced materials. Because as I said, I mean, what we don't want is to create a new program of work that is different for nanomaterials than for advanced materials. We just want to make sure that advanced materials can be integrated in the workflow. And if there's something that goes beyond this possibility, then we can address it properly. So this, in parallel to the work on the consideration on advanced materials, we saw this opportunity to develop a safer innovation approach, and really to start looking at a different mindset. And for this, we developed in 2020 this approach, which has different components. So for example, not to go into too much detail, but the safe by design, which will be really for industry to reduce uncertainties and risk, human and environment risk starting at the design phase and throughout the life cycle, but also the role of regulators on the regulatory preparedness to anticipate regulatory challenge posed, for example, by innovative materials, nano-enabled products, and their safety issues. But this is not something hopefully this is something that could go beyond nanomaterials. We're just using these nanomaterials and nano-enabled product because it's the area where the expertise and where the WPMN plays. So the 2020 report was published, but at the time we didn't address sustainability, which, as you can imagine, can be also a complex issue. So we have developed some working descriptions. So they're not definition, they're working descriptions that allow us to have a little bit more flexibility for the work as we can do it at the OECD, but it really gives you the framework. And the next steps will be how to make the safer innovation approach a little bit more applicable, more pragmatic for industry, small and medium enterprise to start incorporating these different mindsets in developing new products. Okay, so this is where we are right now. It's work in progress, and this is what we're going to be doing in the coming months and years. So the next step is really to link the safer innovation approach and the advanced materials, and the link to do this is through case studies. So Germany and the Netherlands developed this early awareness and action system for ADMA, which is really like a system to compile information on the application and the market entry stage, the human health and environment safety assessment, the applicability of regulatory framework, if there is anything existing in place or not, and whether there are some sustainability aspects that can already be spotted for a new advanced materials. And what we're trying to do is really to look at this proposal on the early for nano and further define it or further develop this for a regulatory purpose. So at the current time, what we are trying to do is to identify case studies and to find leads for case studies. We have a series of proposals on 3D print, nano carriers, graphene, and we have a European project that have approached OECD to lead or to share with us or to develop with us some specific case studies, for example, on silver cellulose particles, or for example, with harmless on aerogel fiber mat for insulation panels. So what is going to happen is that we're going to have a series of workshops. We are developing some information sheets, if you want, just to make sure that we can gather all the information that is needed and then to develop the case studies. But because this is on a voluntary basis, we are still defining whether we will do like a series of workshops, webinars, etc., to develop these case studies. At the end, the case studies will have different purposes. On one hand is to really to test the safer innovation approach, to make sure that it's applicable and to fine-tune it. It's also to test the strategic approach, the early for nano, to make sure and to further refine it. But it's also to see whether we can already spot advanced materials that don't fit in the current framework of chemical management or nanomaterials management and the methodologies that are existing, and whether this can trigger some recommendation for action. For example, whether we need a test guidelines for addressing one, or if we need to do specific guidance or to identify additional information to develop such a guidance. At the end, what we really want to do is to learn and improve safety, sustainability, and the regulatory coverage for advanced materials. And now, we're doing the same with nanomaterials, and to identify the knowledge gaps and develop some recommendations for actions. And then, if appropriate for the OECD, move forward with those actions. So this is where we are right now. As I said, it's still work in progress. We are, of course, very interested to reach out to SMEs because they are the ones at the innovation front, and we want to hear from them what are their needs, what they need from in order to download them. Please feel free to contact me if you need to have something in specific. And thank you so much for the presentation. I hope I kept on time.
Thanks, Ma, for the presentation. We just lost you for a couple of seconds on your last closing remarks.
Okay, well, it was just thank you, and you can contact me anytime. You have the slides and feel free to use them.
No problem. Thanks, Ma, for the presentation. We're moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the overview of activities at ISO on nanotechnology. And the speaker for that will be Dr. Valdemir from ISO. Over to you, Dr. Valdemir.
Yes, hello and good afternoon. So I hope you can see my slides, and I hope I can navigate them well. In order to conserve the bandwidth and minimize the interruption, I'm going to shut down the video while presenting. To start with, I just wanted to thank organizers for inviting me to give this presentation about ISO standards on nanotechnology with emphasis on the safety of nanomaterials. Similar to Bernadette, I am a convener for Working Group 3 in ISO TC229. So let's see if I can forward now. Yes, it works. Okay. So International Organization for Standardization is the largest international organization developing voluntary standards for nanotechnology through Technical Committee 229. This Technical Committee has 5 working groups on terminology that Bernadette just described for us, on metrology, on health and safety that I convene, on nanomaterial specifications, and on products and applications. Its first plenary was held in November 2005. The most recent one was in November 2021, and we're right now planning hopefully in-person plenary in November 2022. The committee has published 100 documents so far and is working on 29 new standards right now. It has 39 participating countries and 18 observing countries. This slide shows structure of the committee in a graphical form. In addition to the 5 working group that I just mentioned, it also has the chair advisory group, non-technology liaison and coordination group, and sustainability, consumer, and the societal dimensions of non-technology task group, shown at the top of the slide. Working groups 1 and 2 are joined with the International Electrotechnical Commission, Technical Committee 113 on non-technology. TC229 also has a number of external liaisons, which allow for other organizations to participate in the development of ISO standards and the other way around. Thus, through such liaisons, ISO TC229 experts can contribute to the development of standards by other organizations. For example, ISO TC229 has the highest level liaison type A with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterials that Mara was just talking about. The L liaison means that TC229 and the Working Party have the right to reciprocally participate in meetings and to comment on drafts. The only restriction is that they cannot vote in each other's ballots. The OECD Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterials is also a member of the Inter-Organization Program for the Sound Management of Chemicals, which brings together international government level organizations to look at the safety of chemicals, including the safety of nanomaterials. United Nations Institute for Training and Research, World Health Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization are the other organizations in this program that are especially active in the safety of nanomaterials. As Mark just presented, OECD Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterials organized its work around 5 steering groups right now. Those focus on testing and assessment of nanomaterials, risk assessment, safer innovation approaches, exposure measurement and mitigation, and the safety of advanced materials. So there is some overlap in the scope of this working party and that of ISO TC229 Working Group 3, addressing safety and health of nanomaterials. However, close coordination of the work of both working groups through the formal liaison allowed to avoid duplication of efforts. I will not go into more details of the working party since Mar already done so. Instead, I will provide some examples of the collaborations between the working party and the ISO TC229. Through the liaison mechanism, ISO Working Group 3 experts has contributed to the work of OECD WPMN and vice versa. For example, OECD experts contributed to the development of ISO technical report on toxic kinetics of nanomaterials, and now ISO experts are contributing to the development of OECD test guidelines on toxic kinetics. ISO experts also actively contributed to the OECD report on safer innovation approach for more sustainable nanomaterials and nano-enabled products, and most recently they participated in the development of OECD description of advanced materials. Again, Bernadette talked about that, and Mar also described the activities around advanced materials in OECD. Since its formation in 2005, Working Group 3 has published a total of 34 documents and has established 43 project groups. About 2/3 of projects deal with human health effects of nanomaterials, and the rest is approximately equally split between environmental safety, workplace safety, and consumer safety. Several standards were led or co-led by South Africa. Specifically, Mary led a few projects and is presently leading, I think, two. We do not have time to list all of the projects in Working Group 3, but just to highlight some. These are 3 most popular documents produced by Working Group 3 as indicated by downloads from ISO website. So the first one is the technical report, health and safety practices and occupational settings where nanomaterials are handled. Next one is also technical report on nanomaterial risk evaluation. And the third one is guidance on physico-chemical characterization of engineered nanoscale materials for toxicological assessment. Standards developed by ISO TC229 Working Group 3 have been used by other international organizations such as World Health Organization. For example, WHO guidelines and systematic reviews for the guidelines referenced these for ISO documents developed by Working Group 3. Nanomaterial risk evaluation, occupational risk management applied to engineered nanomaterials Part 1, principles and approaches, preparation of safety data sheets for nanomaterials, occupational risk management applied to engineered nanomaterials Part 2, use of the control benzene approach. National regulators also use Working Group 3 documents on the safety of nanomaterials. For example, in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration officially recognized all or parts of these 5 standards produced by Working Group 3. Endotoxin test on nanomaterial samples for in vitro systems, limulus ameboside lysate test, guidance on physico-chemical characterization of engineered nanoscale materials for toxicological assessment, nanomaterial risk evaluation, electron spin resonance as a method for measuring reactive oxygen species generated by metal oxide nanomaterials, and finally, surface characterization of gold nanoparticles for nanomaterial-specific toxicity screen FTIR method. Presently, Working Group 3 is working on 13 documents. 4 of those shown on these slides are updates and revisions of already published documents. Working Group 3 is also developing standards on in vitro nanoparticle phototoxicity assays, radiotelemetry spectral echocardiography-based real-time surveillance protocol for in vivo toxicity detection and monitoring of engineered nanomaterials, a method for characterizing and quantifying nanomaterials released from wood products, assessment of peroxidase-like activity of metal and metal oxides nanoparticles, lung burden measurement of nanomaterials for inhalation toxicity studies, evaluation of method for chronic inhalation toxicity based on lung burden of nanomaterials, extraction method of nanomaterials from organs by the proteinase K digestion, test method for detection of nano-object released from respiratory masks, media under different working conditions, and finally, our most recent addition to the program of work, toxicity assessment of manufactured nanomaterials in soils using plant Arabidopsis thaliana. Working Group 3 had presentations from different countries indicating their interest to start new ISO projects in the areas shown on this slide. Dermal toxicity assessment of textile containing manufactured nanomaterials, disinfectant suspensions containing nanomaterials, surface removal, COVID-19 performance assessment, engineering nanoparticles simulating atmospheric nanoparticles, and a method for the removal of carbon nanomaterials from wastewater using hypochlorite. So we can expect a new project in these areas at some point in the future. Working Group 3 also maintains a roadmap for standards development around safety of nanomaterials. Currently, it plans to continue preparing documents in the following general areas as shown on this slide. Standard methods for controlling occupational exposure to nanomaterials, standard methods for determining the relative toxicity hazard potential of nanomaterials and for toxicological screening of nanomaterials, standards for environmental sound use of nanomaterials, standard methods for ensuring product safety of nano-enabled products, general health, safety, and environmental standards. In addition to these 5 areas of activities, the roadmap for Working Group 3 recently added 2 new items shown in green on this slide. Standards for health, safety, and environmental impact of emerging materials such as green nanomaterials, phytochemicals, synthetic biology materials, and advanced materials. And also standards for health, safety, and environmental impact and response to COVID-19, including the use of nanomaterials and filters, antivirals, and cleaning products. There is a great deal of coordination between the activities of the 5 working groups in TC229. And this slide shows priority materials and for other working groups in TC229. For example, graphene, nanosilver, nanoscale titanium dioxide, and nanocellulose, which are shown at the top of this table, materials of interest in at least 3 working groups right now. And therefore, Working Group 3 will aim to address the safety of this material specifically. I would like to conclude my presentation by highlighting the global role of standard development by ISO. ISO standards for nanotechnology, as any other ISO standards, act as soft law, since they don't have legal authority by default unless they are incorporated by reference in the national laws or regulations. I demonstrated this exception as done by the US Food and Drug Administration on one of the previous slides. And nevertheless, there is a better industry buy-in and voluntary adoption of ISO standards because of industry participation in their development, despite them being voluntary standards. ISO standards support regulatory work of governmental, global and national organizations around non-material safety, such as OECD and WHO. Again, as I showed in this presentation, they provide practical tools to evaluate and reduce hazards, exposures, and risks of nanomaterials. And finally, ISO standards raise awareness of nanotechnology safety and provide forum for collaborations globally. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vladimir, for the presentation. We will now move on to the next item, which is the last one before questions and answer session. The next speaker is Prof. Mary Gulumian from academia, and she will be doing her presentation on different techniques and test guidelines for the assessment of toxicity to humans and the environment. Over to you, Prof. Mary.
Good. And thank you very much for the opportunity. My thanks go as well to the previous speakers who presented information very much will be needed to the ones that I will be presenting now. Myself, I am a particle toxicologist, but at the same time, nanotoxicologist very much after nanotechnology was in the scene. And Victor is ecotoxicologist and environmental toxicologist. So hence our contribution to different projects that we've been participating. So both of us, we are very much, as I said, participating with the WG3 Health and Safety of ISO, and very kindly Mar has mentioned that we also participate in OECD WPMN over the years, especially with the test guidelines development, health risk assessment to humans and the environment. Next, please. Now, we are in the academia. We very much participate in research. So as Nomtombi has kindly indicated in her presentation, that research, whether it's different institutes or at universities, is the sort of first line when you start developing something. So the initial step for innovation. So hence we need standardized techniques and test guidelines to do such research in nanotechnology in academia. Now, why? The fundamental reasons for standardization that to ensure a responsible development of nanotechnologies. And hence we think it is quite important that these standardization are implemented in the health risk assessment of nanotechnology. Next, please. Now, contribution by ISO. Now, standardization, we think, goes hand in hand with agreeing on definitions, developing instruments and test strategies, and validating procedures for risk assessment of nanomaterials. And hence, as I said, I'm very grateful to Bernadette, Mar, and Vladimir to giving some examples. But to my mind, these are some of the main, excuse me, main sort of documents that will be and very much of relevance to researchers. Just to give you, these are the examples, but one specific example, many times I see researchers, they use agglomeration, aggregation interchangeably. Earlier, it was mentioned gold nanomaterials and agglomeration, because when it comes to the toxicity, the difference is there because surface area, one of them will be the same as before, but the other one will be changed because surface area will be great relevance for us, how much of, for example, inorganic material will be released to the solution. So there are other aspects there where surface properties, so on and so forth, will be of relevance to the toxicity of nanomaterials. And hence, vocabulary, all researchers should go. These are the examples, and Bernadette gave others as well. They must be familiar with these core terminologies so that communication, we are all on the same page. The next one, please. Examples, specific ones, contribution by ISO that will be, for example, very much of relevance for the instrument-wise. We heard that MISA plus MINTEC plus CSR, really, they have all these excellent instruments that researchers should really make use of to characterize the surfaces. because surface of nanomaterials determines their toxicity, interaction with cell membranes, and once they go inside the cell, how they react, whether they release any materials, and eventually whether they end up in different organelles. Will they cause any lysosomal membrane sort of destruction, or they will end up in the nucleus? So therefore, characterization of surfaces quite important. And these are some of the examples of the ISO documents that have been published, which is characterization of single-wall carbon nanotubes using TEM. Then, of course, characterization of multi-wall carbon nanotubes, microscopic shape factors. Shape is very important. In addition to size, it's not only size, we have to know the shape of the nanomaterial in relation to toxicity, and of course, intracellular uptake. And then nanoparticles in powder form, characteristics and measurements. Most of them they are in, because this will determine how they release into the environment. So these are the aspects that researchers must be cognizant of. Next. Then further examples, science-based health, safety, and environmental practices. I think Vladimir mentioned some of them. These are, for example, guidance on physicochemical characterization of engineered nanoscale materials for toxicology assessment. Most importantly, how to assess the sterility of nanomaterials when we do experiments to assess toxicity. So these are some of the things the researchers should know about. Then surface characterization of gold using FTIR. All these different institutes, they mentioned availability of the FTIR. Then, of course, compilation and description of sample preparation. When we do experiments, we have dose is very, very important. So dose in as an aspect, whether it's in vitro or in vivo. So when we do these experiments in relation to toxicity, we have to assess the exact dose. Then use and application of cellular, in vitro, and methodologies to assess nanomaterial biodegradability. And thanks to Vladimir mentioning that, I think it was Hannes, because this we were worried about. Then many tests, they use short-term toxicity. We have to do long-term toxicity, because particle toxicology is not only whether cells die or don't die. No, some of them, they stay there for longer and longer period. So we have to know what are the ways to assess their long-term effect, because the long-term effect will result into inflammation, fibrosis, and cancer. Next, please. Then we come test guidelines by OECD. Now here, it is quite important that OECD already published number of test guidelines, but existing methods, the question was, were they appropriate to assess many of the hazards associated with the product and processes involving nanoparticles? They may not be sufficient to address all hazards. Also, existing methods used for environmental exposure assessment may not be appropriate. Therefore, current risk assessment procedures need to be modified for nanoparticles. And this is exactly what OECD is doing, where Mar has kindly mentioned some of the test guidelines being revised, being proposed, and being worked on. So existing methodologies, as I said, need to be modified or new ones developed to be able to better determine the physical and chemical properties of nanoparticles, for example, measure exposure to them, to assess their potential hazard, and detect their movement inside living systems, be it in human tissues or in the environment. Next, please. Examples, for example, there were dispersion stability of nanomaterials in simulated environmental media. The next one, the test number 412, where for 28 days. Then the next one was 90-day study. All these, they were developed for chemicals. Now, changes are introduced so that they can be applicable for nanomaterials. Then we have test guideline 125, nanoparticle size and size distribution of nano. Then we have a guidance document on aquatic and sediment toxicological testing. So you've got then dissolution and dispersion stability. Some of them still being sort of worked on. Then assessment of biodurability, as I mentioned, this is the one that, you know, we presented. Next, please. Now, this one where I hand over to my colleague, very, very knowledgeable colleague in environmental and ecotoxicology. So please, Victor, take over.
Thank you very much, Mary. Yeah, I think Mary gave a very good introduction into what I'm going to go on with now, and it's more related to the environmental nanotoxicology side. I think what Mary indicated, which was very important, is that a lot of work had been done on the traditional chemical toxicology, but we all know that the hazard and the way that the toxicity is expressed when one compares nanomaterials to traditional toxicology, traditional toxicants, is totally different. However, as environmental toxicologists, we couldn't reinvent the wheel from the onset, and therefore the decades of knowledge that have been developed and have gone into developing a range of different tests to assess the hazard of chemicals to different organisms was used as a departure point when nanotoxicology started off. Therefore, a number of the tests, for instance, OECD 203, which is the acute fish test, were initially deemed to be adequate to evaluate the hazard of engineered nanomaterials. However, this is a work in progress, and as Mark quite showed out quite well, was that there are initiatives underway where the OECD test 203, which is the fish test, is currently being revised, and a new test is being developed for acute toxicity of fish using environmental nanomaterials as the stressor. So it's always a work in process. There has been a movement to move away from whole animal testing due to ethical reasons, and therefore the OECD 236 test, the fish embryo toxicity test, was developed after the fish toxicity test, OECD 203. However, it was very quickly realized that the toxicity response of the fish embryo toxicity test was being masked by the adherence of materials to the external surface of the chorion of the fish embryo. And therefore, this test was modified with an ISO test which looks at the decorionated fish embryo test, and therefore the hazard of the material directly on the fish embryo is assessed, and it's not the indirect effect of the material adhering to the external surface. So here's an example of where an existing test has been modified to specifically address the needs of hazard assessment of nanomaterials. One of the tests that is being re-looked at and being revised is OECD 201, which is the algal growth test. It's also a bacteria growth test. And the big problem here was that the materials once again interfered with the test because these tests are based on measuring optical density. The materials influenced optical density, but the materials also adhered to the external surface of the algae cells and thereby blocking out the light, and this just decreased the photosynthesis of the algae due to shading, and therefore it's not a direct toxicity response but an indirect effect, which could not give a clear indication of what the hazard of the nanomaterials is. So this was a test that was not used for hazard assessment of nanomaterials, but it is being revised through looking at new OECD tests. Another test which was developed to assess the bioaccumulation potential of chemicals is the OECD TG305. But this isn't a test that is being revised, and a new one is being developed through looking at a tiered approach. So it's not just looking at bioaccumulation potential with a single test, but actually looking at a tiered approach to see which of the bioaccumulation potential tests should be initiated. And the new approach is to provide an alternative to the in vivo bioaccumulation test, considering a range of ethical applications. And this test involves an ex vivo test to look at bioaccumulation of nanomaterials, but it only comes in at a tier 3 level, where tier 1 and tier 2 tests are tests based or considerations based on tests looking at the characterization, so the particle properties, and then also in silico models that are being developed as an indicator of bioaccumulation potential. And then future direction, and this is with something which has come out of the nano-ecotoxicology field as early as 2012 already, is that because of the rapid increase in developments in computational toxicology, together with high throughput methodologies such as the different omics, the potential is there to start looking at whether the mechanistic toxicity that engineered nanomaterials elicit can be used as a fingerprint across different species, so across species. And there's a lot of effort going into developing a approach where a effect at a lower level of biological organization, so at a gene level, is linked to a higher level of biological organization response, so something which is measurable, the traditional endpoints such as toxicity or growth or reproduction. And in this way, thousands of different materials can be tested using high throughput and predict the toxicology predicted based on the adverse outcome pathway construct. Mary, I'm going to hand over to you just to do the final conclusion, if that's fine.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Victor. We think, both of us, the need for standardized techniques and test guidelines in academia is quite important, because standardization and test guidelines have vital function in providing common procedures available to all stakeholders in a centrally coordinated manner. So, but most importantly, I've been saying this number of times to all our researchers, that standards and test guidelines will help create a smooth transition from the laboratory to the marketplace, when it comes to exporting South African products to the international arena. Of course, it was mentioned that ISO, they are voluntary, but the OECD test guidelines more binding. So therefore, when it comes to exports, you have to do some of these test guidelines to see that your products are okay. So therefore, it is very, very important, especially with SPD, that you have, when you produce, you start from the very beginning, or SSPD, as kindly Mar mentioned, that when you are doing your products in industry, it's better to confirm from the beginning that your products really, they are not toxic, they don't release all these materials, because later on you will, in any case, will be requested to do these tests. So thank you very much. I think this is our last slide.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mary and Prof. Victor for the presentation. We will now move on to second last item of the program, which is question and answer session. I will open the floor for anyone who has questions, and you can also use the Q&A button at the top of the screen to type any questions that you might have. So the floor is open for questions. You can just raise your hand if you have any questions, and the speakers will be ready to respond to your questions. Beyond will also assist in terms of giving you some permission to be able to talk. Any questions? Just raise your hand.
I see there's a question in the Q&A box, Pauline.
I'm just opening it now. The one I see is the old one.
Sorry, yes, you're right.
Yeah, it's the old one from the first session. I'll check the chat box as well. There's nothing there. Any questions? It seems that the presentations were very clear to the audience, and well done to the speakers, because I don't see any hand for the questions. So it means the information shared was loud and clear to all of us online. Okay, if there are no questions, then we'll move on to the last item, which is the concluding remarks. From my side, okay, there is a hand from Zuko Pandle. Over to you, Zuko, before we close. The floor is yours, Zuko. Can you hear me, Zuko? Bjorn, are you able to see if Zuko is on mute or not? Bjorn?
It seems that Zuko is muted.
Yes, I see that now. Zuko, can you hear us?
I think she doesn't have access, Pauline. I think she can't speak. I think Bjorn or Karin have to give her access to be able to speak. Bjorn or Karin, please help. But meanwhile,
Sorry, Faith, you can go ahead.
Meanwhile, I saw there was another question on the chat.
Okay, check. Is okay. Zuko is saying unmuted. I think, yeah, we need Beyond to unmute him. And there's another one from Mahesh. He's just saying the session
Good
was
afternoon.
very. Hi, Zuko.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thanks. And you?
No, I'm good, thank you. I must say the session has been very much informative, but I've been scared to raise my hand because I've been listening attentively and taking some very good lessons from the session. But the question I have, I'm Zuko Pandle from the Eastern Cape, working for the Eastern Cape Gambling Board as a regulator in the gambling space. We have so many or so much new technologies emerging in our space. Now, I wanted to check because one of our mandate is to regulate and protect the punters. Now, we normally talk about the responsible gambling and also in terms of the emergence now of the new risk in relation to the money laundering or terror financing. Now, I want to check in terms of the international space. I note that some speakers are coming from countries in the international space. If the nanotechnology is in use in terms of the gambling space, and to what extent can we perhaps in South Africa and in the Eastern Cape in particular take some lessons from that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Zuko, for the question. Dr. Barnett and Ms. Mar and Vladimir, would you be able to respond to the question, please? Any one of you can just come in and respond.
Yeah, maybe I can start.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, ISO ISO TC29 Working Group 3 is developing the safety and health guidance for handling nanomaterials. And since there was a mention of painters, I think ISO has at least two documents that I wanted, well, actually 3 documents that I want to point out is relevant to making sure that painters and other workers protected from risks of nanomaterials. One is Technical Report 12885 on health and safety practices for handling nanomaterials in the workplace, which provide general guidance for industry at large on how to protect their workers. Then there is another technical specification 12901 part 2, which describes control bending approaches for nanomaterials, and these control bending tools are particularly effective at helping small businesses. So those approaches could be more helpful, for example, for painters and companies employing painters. And then the third document developed by ISO, I think, which is relevant, is 12901 part 1, also technical specification, which provide more authoritative guidance on, again, ensuring that the workers are protected from nanomaterials in the workplace. So that's from me briefly.
Thanks, Vladimir. Zuko, does that respond to your question? The information shared?
To a certain extent, yes, but I think what I'll do as well, I'll visit the ISO site and look at the available material there, but it has given me some clues on what to look at. But I think just the first one, I think I may have missed that one. Is the technical report number 12?
Technical report 12885, I believe. Let me just double check.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'll go on the ISO website and then just check for myself. Thank you so much.
Yeah, or you can contact Faith and she will help you with the contacts for Vladimir, and then you can engage further with him.
Okay, much appreciated. Thanks.
Even Faith can be able to assist you in terms of maybe other standards that are developed internationally.
Okay, thank you.
And locally.
Thank you.
Any further questions? More questions?
Yes, Pauline, there's a question from Clement on the chat.
Okay, let me quickly go and check. I cannot hear. The document is also adopted by the SABS as SANS 12885. I see the message on the chat. Faith is from Vero. I think she's responding to, she was responding to Zuko's question in terms of the SANS number. Am I correct, Vero?
Correct, Pauline, thank you.
All right. So there's a number there, Zuko, on the chat box.
Yes, noted. Thanks.
Oh, all right.
Yes, Pauline, I saw that one, but there's another question. I think it came through at 1445 from Clement.
Clement.
Yeah, go up a little bit.
Oh, okay, I see it. Can you please try to explain the differentiation of nano products with other products? For example, difference between cosmetics and nano cosmetics. I'm not sure if you'll be able to take this one, Mary. Prof. Mary?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, I would with pleasure. When we say nano cosmetics, it's not the cosmetics per se. You've got cosmetic products, but the ones that contain nanomaterials are the ones that we talk about. So therefore, there is no difference. One is cosmetics, contain only chemicals, and the other one, cosmetic products, which contain nanomaterials, such as zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, so on and so forth. So these are the differences between the two. Okay.
Thanks, Prof. Mary. Clement, are you covered on that? Clement? I can't hear Clement, but I hope he got the message.
Yes, her mic is disabled. Clemens?
Clement? Clement?
No.
Perhaps to write the response in the chat.
Yes, Prof. Mary, if you could just maybe respond to, are you able to see his question on the chat box from your side?
For him, if he can respond saying that whether he heard my response.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Pauline, he did respond. He sent a chat through and he said, I'm okay. He did respond, but I think maybe he's not able to speak back.
Okay.
But he confirmed that it's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Faith. There is another question from Faith. You'll also assist me with this, ne? I'm trying to browse through so that I don't miss any. I think the next one after Clement is from Mutsidisi. Do we have suitable test equipment to test this nanotechnology? Why most of nanotechnology ISO standards are ISO TS, not fully ISO? Does this international community starting to learn about nanotech? I'm sure, Mary, you can also respond to this one and the colleagues from ISO.
I think Vladimir will be able, in a better position.
Yeah.
Because we have different documents, TS and all the rest. Please,
Yeah.
Vladimir, if you can do that.
Yeah, so, all right, the TC229 since it was created in 2005, it started developing international standards for nanotechnology when nanotechnology was still in the early stages of its commercialization. So this area wasn't established well enough to jump straight into development of international standards. And that's the main reason why most of the standards developed by ISO TC229 are technical specification. Now, as nanotechnology is becoming more established field, we are slowly converting technical specification into full international standards. And in fact, I think we just finished one such conversion in working group 3 for characterization of dispersions of nanomaterials for toxicological testing. So anyway, this is just an indication that we're dealing with nascent technology. That's the main reason why we have most technical specifications. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Vladimir. Mutsidisi, are you covered? You can respond by show of hand. You don't have to.
I also see there is another question about labeling. And I can
was going to, I'm going to that one now from Neo Monahing. What type of industry guidance is in place for the labeling of nanomaterial containing products in South Africa context? Which bodies are involved?
I can just start answering this question from the ISO side. There is again, technical specification published in 2013 by ISO TC229. It's a technical specification 13830, guidance on voluntary labeling for consumer products containing manufactured nano-objects. So this document can be used to provide labeling for nano-enabled products. Now, specifically for South Africa, I would leave somebody from South Africa to answer that specific question.
Thank you, Vladimir. Faith and Vero, have we adopted the standard? Faith?
Paula? Yes, Paula, I think we have. Let me just double check, but I think we have.
Okay. Hannes, you wanted to say something?
Yes, we have adopted that standard in South Africa, the technical specification. So it's part of one of the technical specifications adopted by South Africa.
Okay. I'm not sure what NEO means by which bodies are involved. I don't know if you understand that one, Hannes. Is she referring to the committee members? I'm not sure.
I think maybe she's pointing towards regulators. So it's depending on the industry. CTFA, which is a self-regulating body, follows the European Commission guidelines on cosmetics, but other materials have got different, other committees have got different approaches in terms of, what they do.
Yes. Neo, are you? Okay, thanks, Hannes. Neo, are you covered in terms of the responses given to your question? Okay, thanks, Neo. See your response. Any more questions? One or two before we close, if there is any.
Sorry, there is a question up there. Do we have suitable test equipment to test these?
From CDC?
Yes.
Yeah, I missed that one. Because Vladimir responded on the standard.
Yeah.
On why we have ISO TS, not just ISO standards. That one has been responded to. Do we have a suitable test equipment to test this nanotechnology? Who wants to take this one? Do you want to respond to this one, Mary?
Yes,
please.
Definitely. All these years, the DST, now DSI, been investing quite a lot to establish these test guidelines to how to assess the toxicity, short-term, long-term effects. So definitely there are laboratories that they can do this type of tests using the test guidelines already been sort of developed by ISO and OECD. So that will be, so if anyone else can take over to carry on with the response. So I hope, to sort of, to contribute to answer these questions.
Thank you very much, Mary. Mutsidisi, does that respond to your question, the answer given by Prof. Mary? Okay. I can't hear Mutsidisi, but I hope he got the message. It's 2 minutes past 3 now, and our webinar was scheduled until 3 o'clock without further questions. Thanks,
Sorry, Fallen. Sorry, Fallen.
Yeah.
There's another question that came through from Clement again.
Okay, I only see the one from Mutsidisi acknowledging that he got the response from Mary. Where is it, Faith? Is it above or?
Yeah, just before Mutsidis one.
Okay. If I come back to my question, when we set acceptable limits for a product, we look on quality, safety, or performance. Example, when we need to set limits of pH for body lotion, the value could be the same.
May I just take over? Yeah.
Yes, please, Mary.
Absolutely. The pH is pH. Whether it contains nano, it doesn't, or it doesn't contain nano. Because these are the, you cannot have, because it's nano, you put it in very high alkaline condition or in very sort of acidic conditions. So therefore, definitely the pH is the same. So when you say, when we set acceptable limits for a product, we look on quality, safety, or performance. For sure, quality, whether it contains nano or it doesn't contain nano, safety is the same, or performance. For example, there are many studies that when they use zinc oxide to see whether zinc oxide nanoparticles present in this products, cosmetic or whichever, whether they are able to cross the skin, whether they end up using radioactive zinc oxide. And they could see this penetration is not that much or is not there unless the skin is injured. So therefore, definitely this type of performance and quality, all this been done. And then the next issue, of course, when you use these products, cosmetics, they end up in the sewage, they end up in the environment. So there are studies being conducted with titanium dioxide, which it's been used quite a lot. So therefore, this type of studies are being done, conducted by different studies that they, industries that they produce these nano-containing cosmetic products.
Thanks, Mary. I'm trying to check if there is any more questions. Clement, are you covered? You can write on the chat box to indicate if you are covered or you have a follow-up question, Clement. I'm going to move on to the next question. We still have 2 more questions, which will be the last questions because we are running out of time now. The second last is from Lebogang. The question says, is the SABS TC considering adopting risks management tools, control bending tools, technical standards? There is already an ISO TS for that, if I'm not mistaken. Faith and Vero, can you respond to this one, please?
Can I request Hannes to answer this, Fallen?
Okay, Hannes, over to you. Have we adopted?
No, we haven't. We haven't
adopted any of those at this stage, no.
Okay. Lebogang, are you proposing that we adopt the ISO TS standard? Lebogang, please contact Faith and Veronica if you have a proposal for adoption of this ISO TS standard that you've mentioned on the chat box. Then they will advise you on the due process to be followed for adoption of those the ISO TS standards. Okay, I'm moving on to the last question, which is from Darshana. Has the toxicity of nanomaterials been assessed in consumer products? What is the difference between naturally occurring nanomaterials and their synthesized counterparts? Mary, Prof. Mary, yes. Could you please respond to this one?
Yeah, interesting question.
It is.
It depends. For example, in South Africa, I don't think this approach been taken. Just produced, I see a number of companies, they are doing it. I'm not sure they have taken up that the toxicity of such products being assessed. But overseas, for sure, majority, but the requirements are that you have to assess the toxicity. Using OECD test guidelines all the way and to do risk assessment. Now, to come to the second part of the question, what is the difference between naturally occurring nanomaterials and their synthesized counterparts? When we say naturally occurring, so this means they are in the environment, they are being sort of, that you are not going to the laboratory and synthesizing. And these are the ones we call engineered nanoparticles. And most of the, for example, carbon nanotubes, silver, gold, whichever mentioned all this, they are engineered in the laboratory. But the ones that naturally occurring, they are the ones that they are in the nano size, but they are not synthesized in the laboratory. So when you ask the differences, of course, the ones naturally occurring are there all the time. So in the environment, when we come, for example, the air we breathe, we see that there are PM10, PM2.5, PM.1. So PM.1, they are in that nano region. So nobody has synthesized it. It's in the environment. So we assess toxicity of both, but the difference per se is one is engineered and the other one is not.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mary. Darshana, you covered.
It says, what is the difference in terms of toxicity? You see, when it comes engineered nanomaterials, not because they are in nano region, they are not all toxic. So this means you have to assess toxicity. It's the same with the non-engineered ones. You have to assess their toxicity and see whether you inhale them, whether they are toxic. And so therefore toxicity tests are the same. You implement the same toxicity test to assess both engineered and non-engineered. And thereafter, when we were doing at the beginning, we were worried about particle toxicology, that they are released in the mines. They were in the nano region as well. They are not engineered, but still they produce diseases. So you have to assess their toxicity, their short-term effects and long-term effects. Okay.
Thanks, Prof. Mary. That was the last question from the chat box. I see there is one more from Slama Mohammed. I need to ask about the release of nanomaterials when it is given as medicine. Is it go into liver or kidney?
May I volunteer?
Miss Mary, go ahead. This is the last question.
Okay. It's a good question. That's why for any nanomaterial, we do ADME. That's when, whether injection, whether inhalation, whether through skin, you must know these nanomaterials intentionally given or you are inhaling them to see where they end up. So depending on the surface properties, on their size, how they cross the different barriers, they end up, whether they end up in liver and whether they end up in kidneys. So you have to do this assess per nanomaterial type that you are investigating. Okay, good.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mary, for the responses to the questions. I hope that all the people who have asked the questions are well covered in terms of the answers given. This now brings us to the end of the webinar. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the speakers on behalf of the SABS for the information that was shared with us today. I personally have learned a lot. I would also like to thank all the attendees for honoring the invitation. We wouldn't have had the webinar without audience. And lastly, I would like to thank the SABS team, Beyond, Faith, Veronica, and Karin for organizing the webinar. I thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. And keep in mind, we will have a link on YouTube that we will share with these presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Bernate.